Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are on episode 10 of our featured weekly build discussion series, and today we are featuring Bladesaw's Tesla Tower Trickster. You can see some gameplay footage right here. If you'd like to, of course, see more gameplay footage, including boss takedowns of all of the new Atlas bosses, including Sirius himself with this particular build, then I highly recommend that you go subscribe, ding the bell, and like this particular video that Bladesaw Gaming has put out. Now, let's take a look at his particular build guide. Bladesaw has put together an absolutely gorgeous build guide for us to be able to dissect, interact with, ask questions of, and build out and enjoy nearly all of the content that Path of Exile has got for us to offer. Those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. You can go ahead and like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about more video discussions just like this one. And if you're a veteran of the channel, then you know the way how it works. Down below in the video description, there are of course links to the Path of Building as well as the forum guide posting that Bladesaw has put together for our benefit, as well as Bladesaw's YouTube channel if you'd like to go over there and view any of his particular gameplay footage. So without any further ado, if you want to jump ahead and view any of our timestamps, we've got those available, placed for your convenience in our video description and above my entirely shiny bald forehead, so that way if at any point in time you want to jump ahead or revisit any of our discussion points, you can do so. So Bladesaw introduces the build by saying, hey, this is my first build guide, and for it being his first build guide, he does an exceptional job. I don't care if this was his 10th build guide. This is an insanely well put together build guide that is very, very helpful all the way through leveling the character, all the way up until and through killing endgame bosses. A lot of build guides that get put together in Path of Exile and on the forums will be featured and will just focus in on the leveling process or on the endgame process. And one of the things that Bladesaw does excellently in this build is combine both of those processes, taking you through how to level, how to gear, and what particular aspects that you really need to focus on the passive tree, on your Ascendency, and through your gear, that you will be able to feel exactly like Bladesaw does in all of his gameplay footage, clearing maps and killing bosses left and right. So without any further ado, let's get into the pros and cons of this particular build. As you know, it is a requirement for me before I show off any build and feature it for our weekly build discussion that a build guide creator is genuine and authentic and is open about both the pros and the cons of their particular build. Anybody can put together a build and just tell you the pros about it. They could say it's insanely tanky. They could say it's got tons of DPS. But I really only like to feature and discuss and interact with builds that do both, that say, hey, this is what this build does well, but also is transparent enough to tell you, to warn you, essentially, buyer beware, and say, hey, here are things that this build won't do very well. And if you've played a build that maybe you're looking not to have these sorts of cons or drawbacks, then maybe this isn't a build for you. I love that in build guide creators, that level of transparency. So here are some of the pros. Of course, it's got high damage. This is a crit build, and the amount of damage that this particular build scales off of will take you through the end game, including taking down elders in just minutes. It's got great clear. It also uses Orb of Storms plus Stormbrand and Wave of Conviction Totem in order to give you additional damage boosts and additional, essentially, defensive layers, but really it's offensive layers, right? The best defense a lot of the time in Path of Exile is a good offense. Orb of Storms, Stormbrand, and then Wave of Conviction Totems really help you if you're farming Blight encounters, which, of course, at this point in Metamorph League, we've all found out that Blight encounters are ridiculously profitable. Blight maps are ridiculously profitable. A whole bunch of people are just farming Blight maps to make currency. So regardless of whatever point in time it is that you are playing this particular build, if there is a league mechanic that you can farm safely while being relatively close to a particular base or a particular home of operations, like a pump in a Blight encounter, or like the center of a breach encounter, or like where a boss or a general is located during a legion encounter, then this is going to be a build that is helpful for you. Lastly, on the pros list, this is pretty cheap to get up and running. Now, of course, this one's always tough to say because the meta is always changing, supply and demand is always changing. As soon as any player features a particular build, generally speaking, there's some sort of change inside the particular market economy for the supply and demand of the needed uniques. There's only 3 particular uniques that are really required for this particular build, which is really nice. None of them are top tier chase uniques, which is very, very nice. So this means if you've got some moderate level of income, then you can gear this up and play this build throughout the course of a league. Okay, enough of speaking highly of the build. What about some of the drawbacks of the build? Well, first off, survivability is very gear dependent. So Bladesaw says, I wouldn't say this is glass cannon, but it's no juggernaut. I'm going to say this on behalf of Bladesaw, that means that it's pretty much a glass cannon. Don't expect this particular build to not punish you for having poor positioning or for not paying attention to where various particles, whether they're ranged or melee or slam effects for bosses, don't expect this build to cover up for your mechanical mistakes, all right? This is not the tanky build that is going to AFK Shaper or that is going to be able to take massive hits from large bosses. Secondly, a second drawback is that this particular build requires significant mana cost investment, either through reduced costs or increased regen due to maintain the cost of channeling Storm Burst. So, if you don't like builds that require you to channel or that require you to stack up and use your mana efficiently, then this might not be the build for you. Thirdly, chaos damage is very scary, and it is maybe more scary now in 3.9 and more prevalent than it ever has been. I think the only time that it's ever been more prevalent was when Incursion was initially released, and it was basically like as soon as you clicked on Alva, you were gonna get hit by chaos spitters. Chaos damage is very, very scary. He's got a relatively lower life pool on this particular build. We'll get into all the details of that, but it's about 5.6k on the build in his Path of Building setup. So chaos damage bypassing energy shield can be a big problem, especially as you're interacting with encounters that are chaos heavy. So you could go grab all energy shield on gear and go CI. But if you're looking to do this on a budget, that's not recommended and it's going to be more expensive. So consider that, right? Consider whether or not the league that you are choosing this particular build in, either you need the currency to scale it as an ES character, or you need to be able to keep your eyes open and stay peeled. Keep your eyes open and stay peeled? Yeah, peel bananas. I don't know, peel bananas, peel bananas. Something about peeled. Oh, keep your eyes peeled. Keep your eyes peeled for various sources of chaos damage because they will wreck you on this particular build. Lastly, Elemental Reflect is a no-go. Duh, we are playing an elemental build that does a whole bunch of critical damage. If you accidentally read Elemental Reflect on a map, or if you rather accidentally don't read it on an Elemental Reflect, and you don't set up yourself with a Sybils and with Ugol, then you're going to pop yourself instantly as soon as you touch anything, because you do a bunch of damage, you're going to kill yourself. So be aware of that. All right, enough of pros and cons. Let's get on to the particular bandit and passive tree. The passive tree for this build, of course, features two of my favorite defensive nodes. We're going to come over here and take a look. Of course, there's Acrobats and there's Phase Acrobats. And of course, this takes advantage of both Phase Acrobatics and Acrobatics in order to increase your dodge chance. That's going to be your primary layer of defense on this particular build. When I am playing a build that relies on Acro and Phase Acro, I rush to them. So if you're leveling this particular guide, that's what I would do. If you are wanting to go with a more damage-heavy approach, then don't even worry about coming over onto the right-hand side, really, except for grabbing a few crit nodes. Other than that, you're going to want to move over onto the left-hand side of the tree as you progress, because the left-hand side of the tree is where a whole bunch of the elemental damage in this particular build is going to come from. It's a rather thin tree. What I mean by that is there's not a narrow spine or a clump of clusters that you can get simply by grabbing one particular pathway. Which means, in order to optimize this tree, if you want to go out of your way to grab more points, it means you're going to be sacrificing somewhere else along the various branches of this particular tree. So for instance, if you want to grab more life nodes on the Scion life wheel, you can do that, but it means you're going to have to sacrifice something else that you've spent a lot of points traveling to get towards. So there are some considerations here when you are making decisions about how you want to tweak this particular build. This is a great base of a tree. I, again, would start by going down, grabbing Acro and Phase Acro, and then heading on up into the Witch Tree, making my way eventually over towards the left-hand side of the tree and grabbing all of that elemental damage that is residing inside the Templar tree at this point. As we talk about Ascendency for this particular build, it is indeed a Trickster, and one of the reasons why you're going to go Trickster is because of the easy Frenzy and Power Charge generation, as well as increased effect of those particular charges on the build. It's incredibly easy with Swift Killer to get additional Frenzy charges and to get additional Power charges. You get a flat 15% chance to gain a Frenzy and a Power charge on kill. Notice that that's and. So in other words, when that 15% chance kicks in, it's not, oh, you might get one frenzy charge, or oh, you might get one power charge. It's 15% chance every time you get a kill. Not a kill on a rare, not a kill on a unique. Every time you get a kill, you've got a 15% chance to gain one of each. And as soon as you take Swift Killer, if you've invested nothing else into power or frenzy charges, you're already sitting at 4 of those, which means when you get to a maximum amount of frenzy charges, that is a ridiculous amount of damage for you to kill with. I personally would ascend with this first if I'm in softcore. In hardcore, I would avoid it and probably go with the third or fourth, because it's got nearly zero defensive mechanisms on it, because of course the best defense is a good offense, and this particular build embodies that. This build also grabs Harness of the Void, which gives you 25% chance to gain 25% of non-chaos damage with hits as extra chaos damage. You'll notice that there is a whole bunch of non-chaos damage with hits as extra chaos damage on this particular build, and that's because Stormburst has a whole bunch of various hits. So every time you are hitting with Stormburst, and all that time while you are channeling, you are getting all of these chances to gain additional damage stacking up on top of one another. This is one of the reasons why there's some inconsistencies in terms of the feel of the damage of the build, because sometimes you're going to hit all three of these like right away, and sometimes you're not going to hit it, right? Like sometimes it's just going to stack up and you do a whole bunch of damage, and whatever it was that you were aiming at is dead. Sometimes you're going to go, hey, why didn't I kill that stuff right away? It's because Harness of the Void didn't proc right away. Next up, you're going to grab Ghost Dance, which of course gives us a 3% chance to evade while you have Energy Shield. Then we also have 2% reduced damage taken per Ghost Shroud. Every 2 seconds we gain a Ghost Shroud up to a maximum of 3, which gives us, just flat up when we're at max Ghost Shrouds, an additional 6% reduced damage taken per Ghost Shroud. One really helpful part about this particular node defensively is that, notice this is reduced damage taken. It's not reduced elemental damage taken, it's not reduced physical damage taken, it's not reduced chaos damage taken. This is reduced damage taken. This is also not from hits, it's just reduced damage taken, which means anything that is a dot ability that is dealing damage to you also gets reduced in its amount of damage that gets taken towards your character. Next up, when you do get hit, you lose a Ghost Shroud and you recover Energy Shield equal to 4% of your evasion rating, which gives us some reason to stack up a bit of evasion on the build, and that's okay because we're already stacking evasion along with dodge chance. Lastly, we've got 10% increased movement speed while you have Energy Shield, which is always nice for helping us zip through maps or zip through whatever content it is that we're approaching. Lastly, on the Ascendency tree, you've got Escape Artist, which is +5 to evasion per 1 maximum energy shield on your helmet, and then 1 maximum energy shield per 6 evasion on your body armor. So you can stack your body armor if you want with a whole bunch of evasion, and you can stack your helmet with a whole bunch of energy shield, and those two are going to play off of each other to give you your maximum amount of defensive efficiency on Escape Artist. Also, you get 6% increased attack and cast speed per Ghost Shroud, which remember, you get 3 of those, so that's up to 18% increased attack and cast speed. And then you cannot be stunned while you have Ghost Shrouds. Again, a fantastic mechanism, as more and more in Path of Exile, it is essential for your character to be able to stay mobile, and so your character needs to be able to have some sort of ability that negates the game's ability, the monster's ability in the game to stun you and then get off successive hits against you if you survive the first stun in the first place. Lastly, you get 10% chance to dodge spell hits if you have Energy Shield. So the whole idea behind the Trickster Ascendency and behind the defensive layers of it are keep your Energy Shield, right? You don't have to go CI, but if you've got any Energy Shield, keep it as much as you can, because there's a whole bunch of defensive layers that play around that having Energy Shield as well as having Ghost Shrouds that will help keep your character alive longer. Let's take a look at the gem links that you are going to be using in particular with this particular Tesla Tower cosplay build. So of course, on your 6th link, you're going to be using Stormburst, Physical to Lightning, Inspiration, Infused Channeling, Concentrated Effect, and then either Hypothermia or Elemental Focus. If you use Shroud of the Lightless, in other words, if you're just swimming in currency, then drop the 6th gem. Use Elemental Focus if you're okay losing the Shock or Freeze from Stormburst, which again is a very nice defensive element of the build. If you don't feel like you're dying a whole bunch, then that's fine. Just lose that and swap it out. Relying on Orb of Storms or Stormbrand or Wave of Conviction will actually be a way to proc that essential Elemental Focus. So Elemental Focus overall is a good damage option to swap to in most of the cases, but occasionally there are some reasons to swap off of it. Your 4 link is going to be an Orb of Storms link, which includes Blind, Innervate, and then Culling Strike. Orb of Storms, according to Bladesaw, is indeed a beast. A lot of players used to use Orb of Storms in order to generate power charges on crit. We don't need to do that. One of the reasons why Orb of Storms is such a beast is because of its rate of hits, which got nerfed a while ago, but it's still a ridiculously consistent source of additional utility tools like Blind or like Culling Strike. Innervate will give us more damage. Blind, of course, boosts our evade chance, and then Cull, of course, helps us take out bosses, because every boss essentially has 10% less HP, because at 10% they just die. Imagine if that nasty 3rd phase of Cirrus you just don't really have to pay attention that much to, because as soon as you get him to 10%, he's dead. It's great. So it's a pseudo tower for blight maps, and it's just all around a great utility skill. Next up, we've mentioned a few times the Wave of Conviction totem setup. This is going to be set up on a spell totem with physical to lightning and then increased duration, which helps keep your totem around longer. This gives us a massive boost to our damage through cold exposure. Obviously, when you are using multiple totems, if you want to swap that out, you can, which will give you multiple sources for the Wave of Conviction to be firing off, if that's what you so desire. Keep in mind that duration also affects how far the wave actually travels with Wave of Conviction, which was something that I did not personally know until I read Bladesaw's guide in particular. Isn't POE great? We're learning new stuff every single day. You could, of course, swap this all out to a cast when damage taken setup if you don't actively want to cast this on a spell totem, which, hi, hello, that's exactly how I set it up because I don't want to be spamming a totem every once in a while. That being said, if you're in a boss fight, it's much better to actually lay down the spell totem and consistently be getting Wave of Conviction than rely on yourself getting hit by bosses that can one-shot you. That's not a good idea. So set it up on a spell totem when you're bossing, or if you're mapping and you're already doing enough damage that you don't need the Wave of Conviction anyway, that's when you can swap it over to a cast when damage taken setup. Our next 4 link is going to be Hatred, Herald of Purity, Vol Clarity, and Enlighten. You want to use Enlighten if you want to have more mana available. It's not strictly required, though. One of the things that I love about this build, again, as with so many other builds that we recommend, you can scale your currency into it. So if you just want to start off with Herald of Purity and Hatred, you can do that. If you really want to put a whole bunch of currency into it and scale up with your amount of currency investment, then you can go out and get a top level Enlighten. Vol Clarity should only be needed to be leveled enough to even out the mana spending while you're actually channeling and casting Stormburst. So this will depend on your gear and your tree, so he's not going to give us a specific level, but in general, for him right now, it's level 6. Then of course, as another option, you can use the Flesh and Stone in Sand Stance to blind nearby enemies if you're not convinced that dropping Orb of Storms is a more reliable method for you to actually make sure that you're not getting hit and to increase your defensive survivability. Lastly, we're on a 3 link using Shield Charge for our particular mobility skill. We've got increased duration or faster attacks, whichever you prefer, linked with Fortify, so that way, of course, as always in PoE, if you can proc Fortify, you should proc Fortify because it's a wonderful added layer of defensive mechanics. So if you want to go faster, link it with faster attacks. If you want to go with increased duration, that means that you don't have to Shield Charge quite as much, which sometimes I'll actually link a build that's using Shield Charge with also using faster casting and Flame Dash, because I'll use Flame Dash in order to get around difficult terrain, and I'll use Shield Charge on straightaways where I know I can just run directly into a pack. I'm not going to go into all the details here on the leveling guide, but I do just want to lastly recommend this particular guide that Bladesaw has put together. He gives us some pretty good details here on how to level, so if you're wondering, hey, how do I transition from a level 1 character, from somebody who's just coming off the beach and just killed Hillock, to get to the end game, well, here's how you can do that. He's got an entire section on that, and he's incredibly responsive. If I haven't said it enough yet, almost every single build guide I give out is one that is incredibly responsive, and the build guide authors make themselves available through multiple different mechanisms, whether it's Twitter, whether it's YouTube, whether it's the forum guides, whether it's Reddit. People are very happy to chat and answer questions about their build guide, and Bladesaw is no exception. He does a great job of getting back to people with their questions. Well, lastly, today as we wrap up, I wanted to focus in on one particular unique that this particular build takes advantage of, and it's because it's a unique that you generally don't see being built around. It's called the Light of Lunaris, the Jingling Spirit Shield. So what this particular shield does is it gives you a whole bunch of flat cold damage to spells, and then gives you a flat increased critical strike chance for your spells, which is really good. On top of that, it also gives you some energy shield in that slot on your shield, which is nice because since we're playing Trickster, we always need a little bit of energy shield in order to proc all of that conditional stuff while you have energy shield. It gives you plus 7% chance to block, which is not a bad amount of chance to block just off of, scaling only block on your shield. And then lastly, it gives you plus 1 to critical strike multiplier per 1% chance to block attack damage. On top of that, it gives you plus 25% to critical strike multiplier if you've dealt a non-critical strike recently. Which, don't worry, you're going to be critting plenty often, but you're also occasionally, because you hit so quickly with your Stormburst, you're occasionally not going to be hitting with a critical strike, which means you're going to be constantly scaling your crit strike multiplier when you have dealt that non-critical strike recently. So it's just this nice added consistency. Hey, when you crit, you're going to crit, and therefore that does a whole bunch of extra damage. Hey, when you don't crit, oh, by the way, you just get this flat amount, which is really nice, and it's a fun way to build around and use a unique that is otherwise, for the most part, forgotten in build guides and in build creators' theory crafting when they are building spell-based builds. So shout out to Bladesaw for putting together a build that takes advantage of the light of Lunaris and adds some consistency in the damage output. Finally, of course, everyone always wants to know what they should do with bandits, so if you're leveling this particular character, save Alira. The general rule of thumb when you are killing bandits as you are playing through a character in Path of Exile is if you need mana regen and you're going a crit-based build, then you want to help out Alira. If you're not needing the mana regen and you aren't a crit-based build, then in general you kill all the bandits because the other two options between Caitlyn and Oak simply aren't that great of options. So, as with all crit-based builds, save Alira and enjoy the rest of your build. Well, thanks so much for watching, and once again, shout out to Bladesaw for putting together this exceptional build guide, and I hope that today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you while you are cosplaying as a Tesla Tower Trickster. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.